everybody, and welcome to the Feminine Principle Podcast, Astrology for Authentic Living. My name is Mel with Energetic Principles.
And I'm Shawna with Neo Feminine Astrology.
And in this episode, we will be discussing the astrology for the week of August 14th, and what we have titled, Meeting at a Crossroads. The purpose of this podcast is to give inspiration and guidance for this week with real-life examples of what to expect.
The three major aspects that we'll talk about this week are the last quarter moon in Taurus, which is all about closure at a crossroads. We'll also talk about a very dynamic aspect, which is a T-square of Venus, Jupiter, and Pluto, which is all about the connection of intimacy and power. And lastly, we'll talk about the Sun trine Uranus, which is about dramatic reinvention. So as always, please remember that some of these transits will influence you more than others based on your personal birth chart and what's actually happening in your life right now. So we encourage you to notice what resonates the most, take what you like, and always use your intuition and logic to decide what's best for you.
Yes, because you know you best. So yeah, let's kick off this week's episode with a quick rundown of the moon's path through the zodiac and some other minor aspects for you astro geeks out there. So we're going to start the week off with our lunar goddess making her last quarter square from earthy Taurus. More on that later, as Shawna just said. And she's going to stay there until moving into fast-paced Gemini on Tuesday. She continues on to wrap up her waning cycle by moving into sensitive Cancer on Thursday and then into flamboyant Leo on Saturday, headed towards 2017's much talked about main event, which is the new moon total solar eclipse in Leo, which will happen next week on Monday, August 21st at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Time, 6:30 p.m. Universal Time, and Tuesday, August 22nd at 4:30 a.m. Aussie Eastern Time. We're going to discuss that in great detail in next week's episode, which we will do a special early release of on Saturday the 19th. So just be on the lookout that our solar eclipse episode is going to arrive a little bit early so you can get on board with what's happening. Since it will be a Monday or Tuesday, depending on where you are, event. Also of note, we're going to have Mars in Leo will be sextiling Jupiter in Libra on Sunday, August 20th. And we're going to talk about that in much more detail as well in our Venus, Jupiter, and Pluto T-Square segment. So if you like what you hear today and you find value in what we're talking about, we encourage you to become a patron of this podcast. We now have a patron crowdfunding program up on our Podbean, and you can find that at feminineprinciple.podbean.com. And we are going to have more material that will come along the way to be focused on our patrons, so check that out. So yeah, Shawna, let's get started with our last quarter moon in Taurus. We're finally reaching last quarter of this Leo season in what we have titled Closure at a Crossroads. And you can expect that last quarter moon to arrive on Monday, August 14th at 6:14 p.m. Pacific Time, Tuesday, August 15th at 1:14 a.m. Universal Time, and 11:14 a.m. Aussie Eastern Time. And those will be connecting at 22 degrees Taurus and Leo. So Shawna, kick us in with your quote for this last quarter moon.
So this quote is by the British philosopher and writer Alan Watts. He says, "Muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone." And I love this quote for the last quarter moon in Taurus because this aspect is all about allowing things to settle. Traditionally, the last quarter phase of the moon is known as a crisis of consciousness. And it's called this because it's a time of reckoning how far you've come and where you're going in the future. This is a more internal processing of emotion. It's not about necessarily doing things. It's more about reflection and going back over the old territory. And again, really taking a moment to reckon and to get closure on what you've done and how you want to move forward. So the best way to do this is with this case in a Taurian kind of way. So Taurus is all about calming things down and finding a sense of soothing within the material world. And so Taurus really loves like this quality of simplicity. So that's why I love this. Like even the muddy water is very Taurian. So it's best to allow things to settle during this time.
That's a perfect quote, Shawna. It's so true. If there was any sign I would kind of like attribute to that idea of, something that's diluted, but by separating it, it just requires a little calm and some peace and, some time maybe away from it, in order for it to settle. And so when we have this last quarter moon, like Shawna's saying, it is a crisis of consciousness in a sense. And crisis is not always a bad thing. It's just where we're confronted with something, that essentially is for our own growth. And that's what a square is. It's a turning point in some way. And when we're looking at a last quarter moon, it's really about this last inner push, for our development in the current cycle that we're in. And that is Leo season. So, Shawna, I find it very interesting, especially since we're going to be talking about kind of our headline aspect this week, that Venus, Jupiter, Pluto T-Square, is that our moon in Taurus is having mutual reception with Venus in Cancer right now. And it's right before that T-Square happens. So I think that a lot of what activates this T-Square might kind of start with this last quarter moon in Taurus. What do you think about that as far as, those two talking together and being so active this week?
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. And that, that's something that I hadn't noticed. But yeah, Venus and the moon will be in mutual reception, which means that they're within each other's signs. Venus being in the sign of Cancer, Cancer is ruled by the moon being in the sign of Taurus, and Venus being ruled by Taurus. So, what's really fascinating is that this last quarter moon happens just the day before the T-square of Venus, Jupiter, and Pluto. And so I wonder if there may be, like I see this more as whatever it is that we're at a crossroads with this week, that it might not necessarily be an external factor that triggers it. It might be a shift in awareness that creates like this rippling effect. And I think that that's not to say that it won't involve relationships. I think that's definitely going to be a part of this week, is how we connect, how we relate, how we connect even with people who we have a certain, repulsion towards even. But the trigger may be this crisis of consciousness or a new awareness, or, even getting very clear on what it is that you value, which is a very Venus and Taurus kind of theme.
Yes. In Taurus, we want to know what we value. We want to know what makes us secure. Taurus is all about inner security here. And so, as Shawna was saying about that kind of internal crisis, in a sense, that could really be around your own inner security needs, and what that looks like for you, and how that's kind of coming up and challenging you at this time. Since we are talking about a square, there is some shadow aspects that can come up when two energies that are not quite in alignment with each other talk. And so a shadow of Taurus would be actually not being able to speak about something. Taurus is known for simplicity and and ability to find peace within silence. But at the same time, when you have something to say, it's not always easy to find the right words, right? So especially with this, that Venus action, which we're about to talk about, and is kind of the highlight of this week. We might have something to say that comes to us, and it might not be easy. But of course, when Gemini rolls around and that moves, it's going to be a whole nother situation. But here we're kind of sitting with that. And you might find, I would say, a good sign of like a roadblock, in a sense, to get away from, is if you find yourself emotionally going in circles. Because that's another thing that happens a lot of times with Taurus energy on the shadow side, is it just plays the same scenario over and over and over and over. And that can be good to some extent when we're trying to gain insight upon something. But if you're not getting anything from that repetitive circle, then it's kind of like a dog chasing its tail. You kind of get nowhere there. So just be on the lookout for some of these things. And especially when it comes to Taurus's strong suit is about being, reliable and predictable and practical and patient. But at the same time, this might be what you need to address areas where you're being a little too predictable in a scenario or a little too reliable to your own detriment or stuck in some type of habit or something that is where you're going to need that final push, because we're in Leo season. We're getting in touch with our hearts and what it is that we want and our own personal joy. And if we're stuck in old patterns of relating in any certain way, obviously we can't step into this newness of the person we're trying to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point with the shadow of Taurus getting stuck in that rut, moving around in the same circle over and over again. It reminds me of even like the oxen that are tied to the yoke, and they're just moving through and through and through. And what's interesting is I wonder if even reaching out to people may allow for the healthiest manifestation of Taurus at this point in time, because with the moon and Venus being in a sextile aspect, there's like some kind of opportunity when we connect with others, and that may allow for us to have that simplicity and the peace, but to also not get completely stuck in our own world, not get stuck in our own crisis of consciousness.
Right. Because emotional relating, essentially, right? We're talking about that mutual reception, and Cancer is all about the emotions, for good or bad. But because the sextile, we've talked about the sextile is always an opportunity to take, but you have to do it yourself. So I feel like a lot of this T-Square energy that we're going to be interacting with kind of has to kick off with this last quarter in Taurus, especially since the sun is still in a sextile with Jupiter and trining Saturn, which we talked about in last week's episode. So this energy is still at play as well. And now we have Mercury, who's now retrograde, but is still in opposition to Neptune. So a lot of these energies are still at play for these couple weeks. And what I find interesting is actually Mars in Leo, who's kind of been riding the coattails of the sun, is about to form an inconjunct with Pluto. So I feel a lot of this week has to do with readjusting our actions in a way necessary so that we can step into a lot of these topics that we're going to talk about today, especially Plutonian related themes. So, and a lot of times a crisis can happen with Plutonian related themes. So,
Indeed.
Yes. So it all starts to kind of piece together in some way, shape, or form, to me. And Shawna, I wanted to share with you that, I like to talk about Christopher Witecki's step system, and we're talking about 22 degrees Taurus or 22 degrees anything. And that is like the ultimate breakthrough step. Especially with our emotions, we feel and we feel, and now we have to, we feel and we feel where we belong. And if you don't feel that you belong there, or you're having trouble getting on board with that, then this is a time when that crisis in consciousness is going to break us down in some way, to just break us through, and especially since we're going to be talking about the sun trining Uranus later, I find that very interesting. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I feel that theme of things breaking down to be rebuilt. I feel that really throughout the astrology within these few weeks, within this month. Number one, we have the eclipses, which are basically an entire reset button. We have Mercury retrograde in Virgo, which is about taking something apart and putting it back together. We have this T-square with Venus and Jupiter and Pluto, which Pluto is all about the deconstruction of what's not working so that we can find that like, that gold on the inside. It's like that alchemical process. And then, in a moment, we'll talk about the sun trining Uranus, which is about the breakthrough part. And so, yeah, I feel like, this month it has this feeling of things breaking down or being pulled apart so that they can be brought back together in a way that is more cohesive and more whole.
Yeah, especially since we're headed towards that solar eclipse, this big solar eclipse we've been talking about for so long. All astrologers, astronomers, anybody really, this is on the radar, and these are the types of aspects that really set us up for that renewal in our lives, and for those kind of drastic changes to take place, and that's what eclipses are known for. So just know that you're in preparation here. We all are in preparation. Yes. We just need to get to where we need to be, like this is just getting us to where it is that we need to be, that we've been working on for so long, and especially this year. And these, to me, are like these kind of last, aspects. They'll go on forever, of course. But in what we're talking about now, I feel like these are kind of last ditch efforts, in a sense, to get us on board to be eclipsed, in a sense. So, nothing to be scared of. This is just, all, like Shawna said, to really strengthen, who we are and where we're going and what is next for us. So, that being said, let's talk about these tarot cards. They're an interesting little combination, for this last quarter. I drew the Mother of Swords as the focus, and the Six of Cups as the grounding, which is interesting because the Six of Cups has been in some previous episodes, right, Shawna? We've kind of had our time with this card, and here it is coming back. And so I feel like there's an element of the past that's being brought up during this transit in some way. So how do you look at these two cards put together, Shawna? The Mother of Swords, or the Queen, and the Six of Cups?
Yeah. So, to start with the Mother of Swords or the Queen of Swords, this reminds me that it's good for this aspect to not get stuck in that repetitive thinking, because the Queen of Swords always makes me think of, having like balancing intuition and logic at this time. And so that feels really important to not get stuck in one or the other, that we need both of our faculties this week. We need the intellectual and the really thinking about things, and the being practical, which is very Taurian. But then we also need to lean on our intuition as well, which is the moon side of it. And the Six of Cups is interesting because I feel like the Six of Cups has come up during a time when there is a focus on Venus aspects, when Venus is involved too. And so I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but
no, you're right about that, though. That is astute observation.
Yeah. So I'm like, I wonder if the guidance here is to balance intuition and logic, and to watch out for getting sucked into the rose-colored glasses and being nostalgic and how it is that things have always been. Because at this point, it feels like we're in this teeter-totter of making changes. And so looking back into the past, for me, it can be helpful to reflect on how I felt in the past and how that relates to now. But I have to be very careful to not get stuck back there. Yeah. So that's what I'm feeling, is like, how can we use our past experiences and to use those in a very wise way as guidance for what's happening now, without getting like caught in trying to get back there.
Exactly. Because it's true, chances are memories are going to begin to resurface, and and who knows, people that were in our lives could be doing so too. Cause don't forget, we're talking about a Mercury retrograde situation, happening too. And that's a lot of times the past comes back to us in some way or another. But I love the Mother of Swords there because we can look at those memories with a more critical eye. She's known for her detail and her clarity around something. And like Shawna was saying, being able to navigate between the world of logic and reason and the world of, the emotions and intuition. And so to me, some of these cards playing together, and if we're going to kind of tie them into a possibility of a crisis of consciousness, some would say it could be, at odds with connecting, with our head and, part of us connecting with the head and part of us are connecting with the heart. And we need to bring those two, together at this time. Really step into our own power because the Mother of Swords is a powerful, clear thinking, figure, who owns her power, will tell it like it is, and knows what's up with a situation for better, for worse. And her strength is actually being able to get through a difficult time, and being able to look at it with that, that for logically rather than emotionally, because when we're in difficult times, I'll be the first one to raise my hand. Who goes to the emotional faculty? You're not looking at that with logic, are you? You're like, well, this is, every emotion gets behind it and you're like, oh my God, this is what got me in the first place. So I feel that with her there and, the fact that we've had all these Jupiter decisions, our Mercury's retrograding in Virgo, like Shawna was talking about earlier, how we're kind of picking apart these last, pieces of what it is that we're aligning with. And so I think that she plays a very important role in all that because we're just trying to get to our heart's joy and what brings us emotional joy. And that Six of Cups is essentially that. And simple pleasures, which really represents Taurus, I would say, in some ways. So
definitely.
Yeah. So, interesting combination. When I drew it, I looked at it with that, that funky eye but as it comes together, and especially since it's a repeat card, like I couldn't deny it because I'm like, okay, there's a message in here. Let's get down to the bottom of it. So, So, let's talk about some questions to ask yourself at this last quarter moon in Taurus. And some things I would ask myself, I would say, where in my emotional life am I being prompted for closure? I would ask, how can I break through this inner challenge without going around in circles? How can I read this roadmap of feelings to bring me more stability in this new life I'm building? And then lastly, I would ask, how can I balance my heart's joy and sense of self with true inner security? So, there we have the last quarter moon, and that is really our entryway into what we're going to talk about next. And that is Venus in Cancer, who is making a square to Jupiter in Libra, and then making an opposition to Pluto and Capricorn. And so basically she is, saddling up to, take a part into an aspect that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, right, Shawna, with the whole, Jupiter squaring Pluto. So here she is to, put her, input on this, connection.
Yep.
And so just quick little specifics about this. We're going to have, Venus will actually oppose Pluto first, and that will be exact on Tuesday, August 15th at 4:13 a.m. Pacific time, which is 11:13 a.m. Universal time and 9:13 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 17 degrees Cancer and Capricorn. My moon and sun, I'm realizing. Okay. Well, I'll keep you informed, guys. Yeah. And so, oh wait, you're not out of the woods. You're not out of the woods. So we're going to have Venus square Jupiter on Wednesday, August 16th at 11:40 p.m. Pacific time, which is Thursday, August 17th at 6:40 a.m. Universal time, and then 4:40 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 19 degrees Cancer and Libra, which I think, aren't you a 19 degree sun?
I am.
Or somewhere around okay. So
stay tuned on Instagram for updates of
yeah,
the emotional chaos that ensues.
Yes. Yeah. So any of you cardinal signs out there, Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn that have planets in degrees from, I would say, about 12 degrees to about 22 degrees, you're gonna feel some things here. So Shawna, kick us in with the wonderful quote you have for this T-Square.
I would love to. So this is by one of my faves, Brené Brown, the American researcher, author, and speaker. She deals specifically with shame, so researching shame and vulnerability. So I find that I'm often quoting her when it comes to any matters of Pluto.
Or Capricorn.
Or Capricorn.
Capricorn.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. So she says, vulnerability is not weakness. And that myth is profoundly dangerous. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And so I chose this quote for this aspect in particular because already, number one, Pluto is all about vulnerability. It's about having vulnerability even in places where we feel very tender, where we feel vulnerable, and allowing ourselves to be open to this. Pluto, at its best, can have an element of surrender to it. And when Jupiter is involved, we talked in depth last week about the Jupiter-Pluto square. There's an intensified elaboration on these themes, and there's a call to do this in a way that honors not just the individual but the people around us as well. And so this is all tied in together with Venus in Cancer, and Venus in Cancer really wants security, wants connection with others, even wants creativity, and all of these come together. And this to me is an aspect that may bring up some areas of vulnerability, of a desire for connection, a desire of deep connection. And I think that the more that we can shift our mindset on having to present a certain appearance or to be the one having the upper hand, I think that when we can shift into when I'm vulnerable with a person that is safe for me to be vulnerable with, I can actually have that deep, meaningful connection that I crave so much.
Yeah. No, that is true. And that's a lot of what, Venus, in Cancer, Venus in Cancer opposing, Pluto and Capricorn, you pretty much nailed it there as far as what we need to open up to and the issues around feeling secure and being able to have that vulnerability. And Capricorn is not always known for being vulnerable. Actually, it's never known for being vulnerable. And I am pretty sure I just talked about this with Shawna earlier before we got on the horn with you guys. I was just talking about my Capricorn moon and how that leaves me to be a little impersonal at times due to the lack of vulnerability. So I find those themes, very poignant. And what I find also very interesting, if we were going to shine a light on Pluto here, is the moon is actually going to be in Gemini, at the time of, well, it's interesting because we're going to have Venus, opposing Pluto first on Tuesday, and the moon at that point is still in Taurus, and it's going to be squaring the nodes and the eclipse point, to where we're about to be headed. So that's a little interesting aspect there. But I find very interesting that when we get to that Venus square Jupiter transit the next day, it turns out that the moon at that point is in Gemini, and the moon is going to be making a sextile aspect to Mars, and Mars makes a sextile to Jupiter. So basically what's happening is all these planets are talking together and they're forming a yod in the sky. And the yod is the finger of God, and where it points is kind of where we need to look, and that's going to shine a light on something. And this yod is pointing a light on Pluto as the focal point. So here we are with these Plutonian issues, once again. And, like Shawna was saying, we have to strip down in some way to be more vulnerable, especially in this sensitive Cancer, this Venus in this sensitive Cancer. You know, it's a very it's can be a rough place to be in a sense, you know, because here we are talking about hard aspects, hard yet fruitful aspects. So if you're going to look for road signs again for some shadow material, you know, if you're finding yourself moody or a little needy or childish around your emotions, or you're worrying or living in the past or feeling like dependent in some way, these are signs that Venus is not talking to Pluto, is not compromising with Pluto, in a sense. So, you know, how can we open our feelings up and be more vulnerable for healing? Cause this could be an excellent healing aspect, where we can find more love, trust, and acceptance, within ourselves, within our partnerships, and, within how we socially relate ourselves to others. So I feel like there can be a shedding of the shell in a way, you know, because here we are talking about our crab friends, which Shawna and I are those crabs. And sometimes it's hard to shed that shell. And Pluto asks honesty and essentially trust and vulnerability from you to be able to do so. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting with that you point out with the yod pointing specifically to Pluto. And Pluto, it does require honesty. I think that it's such a tangled issue sometimes, these issues of honesty and vulnerability. And I've been really stewing on this idea of allowing the feelings to come up instead of trying to like shove them down when I don't like what they are.
Very Capricorn.
Yeah. And I'm reading this book right now that has really been helpful, just as far as a perspective change on all of this. It's called The Path is Everywhere. It's by Matt Licata. And that basically the whole book, like you don't even have to read the book. The whole message in the book is whatever it is that you're feeling, whether that is jealousy or guilt or low grade unhappiness and just like melancholy, like whatever it is, there's no need to really get rid of that feeling. Like it's not bad. And the very act of rejecting the feeling and being like, ooh, like I need to fix this about myself because it's not like a good, quote unquote, good feeling. That actually is what creates the suffering. And, I've been playing with this idea of like when I feel these feelings, just letting them be okay. And that actually helps me to process them in a weird way. It reminds me of the element of Pluto being about surrendering to the messiness of life, surrendering to the dark feelings that we don't like to have, whether that is like melancholy or depression or like being jealous or being judgmental when we think that we shouldn't be. So I encourage everyone to like, it's this delicate balance between allowing things to come up and, allowing them to be there, but not allowing them to motivate an action necessarily.
Yes. And I think that's very wise advice and so true of Capricorn energy. Because here we have Pluto and Capricorn, which is kind of asking a paradox of us in a sense with, you know, like it's as you're just saying, Shawna, you know, having those emotions come up and then sitting with them and allowing them to transmute themselves into healing essentially, by allowing them to be what they are and honoring that feeling for what it is and then moving on. And a lot of time, Capricorn can have a really hard time with that vulnerability aspect, to where it lets those feelings come in and will allow itself to give the time to process them because, you know, business has to be done and you have to push things down and carry on because God forbid someone look at you and you don't have it all together, you know? So just know that, it's okay if you don't have it all together. None of us do. None of us
Yes.
do. You know, at times we can fake it, but part of life is the fact that we don't have it together and we're just navigating through these waters in order to get it together. And that is essentially growth. And here we have Jupiter in the mix that is squaring both of those energies. And Jupiter is wanting us to grow. It's wanting us to grow with others, and it's wanting us to trust in, the choices that we're making, during these, crossroads that we're all in. And I think that this is going to be an emotional and a relational crossroad for a lot of people, with this Venus, T-Square. So yeah, Shawna, how do you feel that, actual relationships with other people, might play into all of this?
Yeah. So I am wondering how this will play out in a more practical way. And so my sense is because it's an opposition of Venus and Pluto, like, yeah, there's going to be some situations that come up within relationships or within partnerships. And, it seems as though there may be issues where feelings come up, Venus in Capricorn, or Venus in Cancer and Pluto in Capricorn. And there may be a crossroads moment where we have to decide how to handle that. And, you know, we can't tell you how to handle that, like, specifically today, but we can say, like, how are you going to handle that in a way that is authentic so that you're honest with yourself, you're honest with the person that you're dealing with. And so I would watch out for trying to make excuses for things that are happening, and like we've talked about, like shoving things down and sweeping things under the carpet. My sense is that we will not be allowed, so to speak, to sweep things under the carpet.
Yeah.
There will be like a confrontation with the truth of a matter. And a confrontation doesn't have to be a bad thing. I think so often when, especially, you know, having Mars in Cancer myself, I am like, oh, confrontation? Like, no, I'm out. But I've learned it can actually be, really therapeutic. And so there is something that will come up that needs to be dealt with in a way that is authentic and that allows for vulnerability. So, I think the more that we can be open to approaching that in a way of having curiosity and, like a sense of maybe even like playfulness too, because the moon is in Gemini, that, you know, that may be helpful in navigating through the crossroads.
Yeah. It's true. And it's so funny because I feel like Jupiter, especially in Libra, is kind of like the judge sitting in the middle of it all in a sense, you know, it is like, okay, you speak your side, Venus. You speak your side, Pluto. Okay. Well, is this harmonizing? How do we bring harmony here? You know, and, it's also interesting because, the shadow side of that, you know, Jupiter in Libra, is pushing us for growth. But at the same time, as we've talked about in past episodes, you know, Libra can be known for some indecision or not being able, to, actively make certain, you know, choices in life. So I love that Jupiter's kind of the judge here, and the judge is going to put down the gavel wherever the growth needs to be placed. So there, you know, and that could happen with words, because here we are in that, you know, the fact that the moon and Mars are in a, you know, an opportunity. The moon and Mars, we can kind of assert our ideas in a sense, with that Gemini energy, and what's been on our minds and what we're thinking, is going to come out easier than ever. For better or worse. For better or for worse. So that's where we have to, involve, such a thing called tact. And that can be hard when, you know, cause Venus, the shadow side of Venus can be a little, you know, a little, I don't know. I don't want to use the word petty per se, but there's an underside of Venus energy. It's not all that, you know, just attraction and relationships. Like Venus can get lazy about things, as well and sweep things under the rug because, it's just easier just to like, but Pluto is not going to let that happen and Jupiter is going to push that along. So like Shawna was saying earlier, how can we bring up this dialogue? How can we bring up this what are the words I'm trying to think?
What incarnation?
How can we confront this so that we can compromise in the end and find more harmony? So just for a little roadmap, as far as the conjunctions are concerned, because Shawna and I like to talk about cycles. And so if you want to kind of look back to see how these might be playing out in your life, we had the Venus-Pluto conjunction on November 24th of 2016 at 15 degrees Capricorn, which is interesting because that's the day my kitty passed. That day I remember very, very well in my head. But, and then, we also have Venus, who conjuncted Jupiter, at 27 degrees Virgo on August 27th of last year. So if you want to look back to these times and just see if there's anything that comes up that kind of paints, the current journey you're on with these, planetary connections, you might see a little insight. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It's always fascinating to see all of the cycles coming together.
Yeah, it's because it's all interconnected, these are not isolated incidences. And that's the first thing to wrap your mind around when you're doing astrology or interested in astrology is that, it's not just one-on-one action with something. There's so many factors involved and why the big picture is very important. So that you can, really understand the minutia, which this isn't quite minutia. This is a big transit, but it's a big personal transit, right, Shawna? Because it's Venus. This is personal planet.
Yeah. And I think that when we bring it down to, okay, what's the context? And the context is what's happening in our lives at the moment. For example, when Venus last, conjuncted Jupiter, I was at a point where I had tried a lot of different things as far as, some freelance work, and I came to a realization of something that really was not working that I had been trying for a long period of time. And Venus and Jupiter, when they conjuncted, were in my second house of money and finances. And so, and I'm at a bit of another point of contemplation at this period in time. A part of that we were talking a little bit earlier about I've been thinking about incorporating different practices into my readings and things like that. So it's just really interesting to see how, we can't always predict exactly how something's going to come into effect, but when we look back at the beginning of the cycle, it gives a certain context to what's happening now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And now that I'm thinking about it, during that Venus-Pluto conjunction, for me, besides my kitty dying, that was like right when I got off the last tour that I did with my band that, ended up falling apart. Not the tour, but the band. And this was the beginning of this cycle, where this Venus-Pluto cycle is very interesting because now I have some new connections, musically, that are coming along down the road. And here we are at the opposition. So I'm interested, and it's on my sun and my moon. So we shall see, how that all plays out. But, I'll let you guys know. But, cause this girl's gotta keep rocking.
Yep.
Yes. So let's talk about the tarot cards that are associated, with these two transits. So I did a drawing, I drew two cards for basically how Venus is kind of interacting in all this, and she's kind of the star. And I got, the Two of Wands as the focus and the Mother of Pentacles as the grounding. And I find that very interesting because we're back to the Two of Wands. And if you listen to when we talked about the Jupiter squaring Pluto, I think it was 2 episodes ago, we have the Two of Wands. So here this card is back, about that, and I think paired with that Mother of Pentacles, this could be a time when we're really reflecting in a Venus sort of way on what it is that we've built, in a sense, and the decisions that we've made, and the commitments we've made to a lot of things recently, and getting our heart and head on board with each other. So Shawna, how do you see this, these two cards together, and especially since we've had this contact before with the initial square?
Yeah, so I am just reminded of the massive appetite that Jupiter and Pluto bring together as a combination, a massive appetite for ambition, for taking on great things, and the potential for greatness that these have together. There's a lot of potential for having big visions and moving towards a big goal. And what I really love is that the Queen of Pentacles grounds this. The Pentacles is it reminds me of like earth and practical matters and getting shit done and all of those things. And so this to me it's a reminder that it's a reminder to keep the eye on the bigger picture, that whatever is happening right now, that it's all within the context of something that we're building for ourselves. Because that's what Jupiter and Pluto really makes me think of. It's like, okay, what are we building? And what are we building not just for ourselves, but that can help a greater good, ideally. I think that's the shift point of all of this too, is that especially with Pluto, the shadow side is always putting one's own needs first, sometimes even to the detriment of other people. But then the higher side of this is, okay, how can I really use my vision and my creativity and like this hunger that I have for life to do something that has a big impact on the world.
I like that. It's, well, cause it's true, you know, with the Two of Wands, it's the initial decisions that we're making here. We're at the start of something. And these are the choices and decisions we're making essentially that are putting us on the road to success. And we're being confronted with, these choices. And, you know, the Queen, like you were saying, Shawna, is all about practicality. And we do have Pluto involved in Capricorn, which is very practical. And so I would be asking myself now, you know, am I making practical decisions? Am I involved in practical partnerships? And are my inspirations practical? You know, because the mother basically wants to manifest secure situations, especially financially and materially. So these bonds that we're making with other people and these commitments, and the partnerships that we are basically aligning with, because we have the same goal, we just gotta make sure that these are the right decisions that we have in place. We're being practical about everything. And like Shawna said, we are building right now. And we're getting whatever it is out of the way in order for us to continue down that road of success. So I think that there's a lot of, opportunity to put our plans in place, around this time, whether or not that is, challenging thing or it comes easy. It's a little combination, cocktail in a sense, because here we are talking about this T-square, but we have all these other planets like the moon, Mars and Jupiter who are speaking rather nicely to each other. So there is element of, struggle and challenge, and there's also element of, even flow going on. So, yeah, we're going to have to kind of navigate, you know, through both of those so we can come out on top.
Yeah. It's nice to have a little bit of support through challenging transits.
Yeah, because they're here to challenge us for the good, right, Shawna? They're just trying to get us to where we need to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, some questions I would ask for this Venus, Jupiter, Pluto T-square. I would say, how can I morph my vulnerability into my strength? I would ask, when operating with complete honesty, where do I need to open up more by relinquishing some aspect of control? And then lastly, I would ask, How can I connect intimately with my own personal power to push further down the path of growth?
Nice.
So these are questions you can ask yourself. And if, we'd love to share with you, what's going on with these transits for ourselves. If you want to, share with us as well. Cause, when we read out these transits, apparently Shawna and I are right in the thick of it. So, let's get that discussion started, and you know where to find us on Instagram or Facebook. Let's move on to last but certainly not least, and something I think is really lining us up nicely to jump on into this solar eclipse, and that is the sun in Leo trining Uranus in Aries. And that's going to happen on Saturday, August 20th at 11:23 p.m. Pacific time, which is Monday, August 21st, 6:23 a.m. Universal time, and 4:23 p.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that's going to happen at 28 degrees Leo and Aries. And we have titled this, what have we titled it? Dramatic Reinvention. Dramatic Reinvention. So Shawna, kick us in with your quote.
Yeah, so this quote is by the Mexican singer and songwriter. I hope I will say this right. I think it's pronounced Thalia or Thalia.
Talia.
Yeah, close. I was close there. Yeah, Thalia.
Yeah, her. Okay.
Yeah, that gal. So she says, there's nothing more addictive or incredible in life than reinventing yourself and allowing yourself to be different every day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is totally the sun trine Uranus, but the sun in Leo trining Uranus in Aries. Because these are both fire signs, there's this dramatic kind of effect. And when I was looking at this aspect, I was reminded of the people that I know that have a sun Uranus aspect in their birth chart. And they're always like trying something new or trying something different. There's this like constant reinvention, and it's different than a Plutonian, reinvention or Plutonian transformation. The sun and Uranus coming together in contrast is more about like, I'm going to try something totally different. And it's not just totally different for the individual, but it's often very different from the status quo. So it's not like a little tiny change. It's like a dramatic revolution kind of change. And so I'm excited about this because it's something that we all get to experience, not just with this transit, but I think that it informs the solar eclipse that will happen shortly thereafter as well. I'm curious, what do you think about that, Mel?
Yeah, no, that is big in a lot of ways. I mean, it's the same degree. It's like it's right before it happens. And just a little so everybody knows, I was actually born with sun trine Uranus. It's the closest aspect I have in my chart. And yeah, I was born with Uranus on my ascendant, exact trine to my sun, and exact sextile to my moon. So I understand this Uranian energy, and Shawna, you're absolutely right about it. Just being willing to try new things and reinvent yourself constantly. And I dare say sometimes we're reinventing ourselves too much. And restlessly trying new things. I've began so many new things in my life, and I don't finish them all, but that's what's kind of exciting about that energy to begin with. But as far as the solar eclipse plays in, like, I really think, cause whenever we're talking about, Uranus, we tend to pepper in the words break free, right? We're allowing ourselves to just kind of have this freedom in order to pursue, inspiration and the thoughts that come to us in these quick impulses, and to have the freedom and curiosity, in that innate restlessness in order to be able to go after these things. And especially since it's in two fire signs, we're talking about Aries and Leo here. When we have the connections in fire signs, that's when change happens, that's when that spirit is essentially flowing. And I think this is probably one of the most beautiful kickoffs that we could have to a solar eclipse. And that could be my Uranian self talking, because I'm okay with this energy, but not everyone is. Not everyone is, especially since we were talking about that Taurus last quarter earlier in the episode. Taurus is not necessarily a sign that would jump after some Uranian, change in a sense. I feel like it's giving us what we need to really kind of launch us into this new aspect of ourselves that are going to be growing, because Uranus is in Aries, and we've been working on these issues for the last 7 years of our own, personalities and identities and our independence in some way. And I think that's essentially being awakened. How can we step into those principles, alongside with our hearts and what brings us joy and our own self-expression? Because we're pairing these two together, in harmony. What I think is interesting about the trine is that it flows so easily. It has this potential for unlimited growth in a sense. But ultimately it's an act of your own will and your own self-discipline that can trigger these powers to interact with each other. And so I was curious about the sun conjunction of when the sun conjuncted Uranus and started the cycle, which was April 13th of 2017 at 24 degrees Aries, which is interesting because that's where our North Node is right now. But I went back into my own journal because I love to look at what I'm doing at that time, especially aspects that are poignant in my chart. And I found in my writing, I wrote this exact thing, and I find it so Uranus and Aries and the sun. And I wrote, I realize it's up to me to do the things I love to do, and I can't rely on anybody else for that.
Ooh.
So this is the thought. Oh, I just had chills. This is the thought that I had at the conjunction. And the trine is a perfect time to reinforce these things. And it's just not just me that can relate with this. Everyone can relate with this, doing what we love to do and relying on ourselves and our own self-discipline and will to create those opportunities for ourselves. So yeah, I wanted to share that insight with y'all. So what do you think, Shawna? What do you
Yeah, well, I think that you're so on target with the fact that not everyone is comfortable with reinvention. Not everyone is comfortable with dramatic change. And what's really interesting about this being a trine aspect is trines, like you said, Mel, it's something that comes easily. It's almost like effortless. And so I'm really curious about how that's going to feel for everyone, especially for someone that doesn't like change or, is afraid of change. I think that even though it's a trine and it's quote unquote harmonious and it's something that comes easily, I think that it is still always a choice. And, a trine is even more of an emphasis of a call to choose something, because when it's a square or when it's an opposition, we're really confronted with the matter. It's typically not something that we can avoid. And so, a trine is like this tricky thing where, we have to decide, we have to claim this for ourselves. And so I think that the amount of willingness and openness that we have to really shine and to express and share and be creative, all of those things, the more that we're open to that, the more that we will reap the rewards of this transit.
Mm-hmm. Especially with Uranus involved, you can have something unexpected, because we're in the beginning of this cycle. And so there's still that outside element coming to play, that can, come up to where, maybe some new things are presented, that can help us, get in line with those things and kind of break us out of, any type of stagnancy in our lives. And keep in mind, Uranus did just go retrograde, which we talked about a few episodes ago. And it's still very slow moving. And so, yeah, a lot of this could be happening internally. And if you want to go back and listen to that episode, we talk about all about inner renovation, right? Inner revolution. So this is one of those perfect aspects that can trigger those things that we were talking about in the previous, podcast. I also find it very interesting that, Venus, who is just cruising along, in the zodiac, I can't believe she moves so fast. But she's about to approach a square with Uranus. So we did all this work in our T-Square action with Pluto and Jupiter, and here we have this next aspect where she's got a thing or two to say about this one as well. So I'm interested to see how Venus kind of plays into to all this, and hopefully what we've been working on earlier this week can now kind of be freed in a sense with this Sun trine Uranus aspect. Yeah, there's a lot going on. You know, we're so close to that eclipse, Shawna. It's so close. The fact that it's kind of boggles my mind a little bit, to how we're kind of ushered into this eclipse energy with a very, free flowing type of aspect.
And I'm struck by the dynamic element of this eclipse. Like, it's in Leo, and not to get too far ahead, but it's in Leo. The Mars will be there with Uranus there in a harmonious way. I'm just like, damn, this is going to be a fiery time. Like,
yes,
I think it may feel intense, but I think it's, it's going to be a lot of fun, and people like there's like this excitement buzz kind of thing I feel from it.
I know. And it's so funny because people are going to be like so in tune with the kind of moving into the future. You know, we're all going to be out there with our solar eclipse glasses on and like looking at, you know what I mean? Like the whole idea, like we're all preparing ourselves for it. And, it's very interesting too because I, follow mundane, astrology and, with our our president being so Uranian as well, and the eclipse being really on his points. And I'm sure there's lots of, papers and articles you can read on about that. I'm very interested to see how, this aspect will play out as far as him too, because he's a Uranian figure. So there's so much that is to be considered, not only within ourselves, but in our world and everything that's happening right now. I mean, that dramatic reinvention that we are labeling this is not only within ourselves, it's within our surroundings and our planet. And we all are getting on board, with where we're going. And, change is here in so many ways. And there's really no way of getting around that. So let's embrace it.
Yes, full participation.
Yes, it's true. That being said, let's look into this tarot. The cards that I drew for this aspect were very interesting as well. It's not one that I would go to right away, but I have a feeling that all the cards that we're talking about this week have really kind of melded themselves into one another, to where it's talking about the transits, but it's really talking about kind of all the transits that have been leading up to this week. And so for the Sun trine Uranus, I got 4 of Pentacles as the focus and the Father of Cups as the grounding. And part of me really feels that these 2 cards are painting the picture of using our imagination to get ourselves out of a rut. And any type of rut we've been in, especially since we probably might have addressed those kind of issues with that Taurus last quarter moon, if we're finding that some certain things need to go in our lives, and especially, an emotional rut of some sort, we are wrapping up, this trine is happening as we're wrapping up our Leo season cycle, in that balsamic moon. So there's a lot of release, I think, that can happen right now, and that Uranian energy is putting itself behind it. Because honestly, the 4 can go 2 ways. With the 4 of Pentacles, you either have built a solid foundation that you can grow upon and you feel more secure with where you are, or you've been holding on too tightly to something and it's time to release that need to control it. So wherever you find yourself on those, with whatever side, like ultimately that Father of Cups is asking you to be emotionally, stable, and wise, about, the situation that you're in, and compassionate most of all. So, so Shawna, how do you think these two, kind of unique cards play into this unique transit?
Yeah, I really like that interpretation, Mel. And it makes me think of how sometimes we have to, like, one little brick is placed on top of the other. And especially the Four of Pentacles, it's like, okay, maybe there's a solid foundation and we have needed to have this certain method of going about things or doing something or a certain path. And now it's time for the next layer in that process. And that doesn't mean that what we've been doing in the past is, needs to be thrown away or that it's wrong or that we shouldn't have been doing it. But it's like, okay, we've gotten to this certain point. We've gotten to a threshold. And now what is the next iteration of that? What is the next level, basically? And yeah, with the King of Cups, there's this, there's possibly like doing it in a way that allows for openness and creativity, while still maintaining that structure, still having that solid foundation. But it's just like you're putting, like, it makes me think of like decorating a cake. First you do like the base layer and then you put all the flowers and then you put flowers on top of the flowers and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Cause I mean, essentially that four, like I like to say with the four or any four, but especially Four of Pentacles is like, it's a nice place to be, but you don't want to live there. Like this is, it's time to add more flowers on our cake, essentially. And to continue on, and to, you know, cause the king really understands his emotions, and, can act upon them and be more, balanced and controlled in his emotions. And sometimes we say stuck in certain areas because, emotionally it's challenging to, go elsewhere and to add those flowers, you know, and, you know, cause it feels so stable, but really it's time to move past this point. And that Sun trine Uranus is ready to kind of jolt us into, the future in a sense. And I kind of find it interesting with the whole king, because the king, you know, especially the cups and it's about the heart and the emotions and the, you know, feeling faculty. And that king really cares for humanity and the people that are around him. That is an interest of his, and he wants to, be that, you know, guiding light and support in some way. With his ability to empathize with people. And then the opposite with the four is sometimes the four gets stuck in greed and possessiveness. So I think that there's this kind of like sharing, you know, sharing and caring versus, not in a sense. And how we can open ourselves up more, not only for ourselves, but the people that are in our lives, because once again, you know, Venus is approaching its square with Uranus during this, and Venus is talking all week. And we have these Plutonian themes, and because transits move slowly, these are still aspects at play for days, at a time. So yeah, I feel that is kind of, yeah, I feel like this Uranian influence can really just get us out of a rut in a sense. It doesn't have to be an extreme one. It could just be little things that kind of keep us stuck in these old patterns that, need to be, released for that newness that Shawna was talking about earlier, that ability to renovate, and reinvent yourself and try new things in life.
Yeah, I like that. And I like the idea of doing that in a way that, is also enlivening for the community, for your peeps.
Right. You know,
not
we
a
gotta
solo
be here.
project.
That's right. I like that. Yeah. Although I guess it's in Aries, so we'll see how that works.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, I know. Okay. So some questions I would ask myself around Sun trine Uranus, I would say, how can I reinvent myself to be more in line with my heart of today? I would say, where am I being awakened? How can I say goodbye to any ruts I have been in? And then lastly, I would say, how can I honor what is different and unique within myself and use that individuality to shine? Yes. because we're about to be eclipsed. And I cannot wait to talk about that with you next week, Shawna. It's going to be the eclipse episode. I don't even know if we can talk about anything else, but we will. So to wrap it up, what have we learned? We've learned a lot of things today. You know, we are essentially meeting at a crossroads. And that last quarter moon in Taurus is kind of that closure of our crossroads. And that Venus, Jupiter, Pluto T-Square is asking us to really connect with our own intimacy and power. And then at Sun, trine Uranus is lastly asking of us to have a dramatic reinvention. How can we dramatically reinvent something about ourselves so we can move into this solar eclipse with the freshness that's needed to essentially start life anew, and in a place that is more aligned with our heart and its joy. So yeah, it's such a interesting time, Shawna, we live in.
It is.
Oh, yes. So I know that you have an excellent action item to share with us for all these transits this week. So please do so.
I do. So this is a 2-part action item. So this is, I want us to do a little journaling around what it is that intimacy means to you. So you can do some free writing, you can make a list, but what does it mean to you to be intimate with another person? And this can be romantic, it can be platonic, whatever it is. Ideally, I'd like to think of it as more of a general thing. So when you're intimate with a person, when you have a friendship that feels very connected, or a partner, or just something where you depend on someone else, what does it mean? What does it look like to be intimate with them? And then the second part of that is, how does that relate to your relationship with yourself? How are you intimate with yourself? And, you know, these are very open-ended questions, so it's not supposed to look like anything in particular, but I wonder if there's a connection there. So just a little food for thought. And then, of course, we always love to hear from you. And when you take action, when you share it, it actually allows for that to be integrated at a more practical level and at a subtle level too. So let us know how this is going. You can either leave a comment if you're listening to the podcast, or you can share a photo with us and tag us on Instagram. I'm under Neo Feminine Astrology, and Mel is at Energetic Principles.
Yes. So we want to hear from you. We want to see what you're doing and how you're integrating all these things every week. And we'd love to share with you as well. So let's get this community going. So speaking of community, where you can find me at energeticprinciples.com. And as Shawna just said, you can find me at Energetic Principles on Instagram and also on Facebook. And I have up on YouTube, horoscopes for this month. If you want to look into some of these transits, I have, horoscopes for each sign and rising. And I do talk about this Venus T-Square that we're talking about today. So check that out. So Shawna, where can they find you?
You can find me on neofeminine.com. And again, under Instagram, under Neo Feminine Astrology.
Yes. And we are here for you. And all these are generalizations. So just know that if you want to get more specifically connected to what it is in your birth chart, we are here to offer that for you. So please contact and reach out. So yeah, Shawna, any last words for our listeners today?
So just sending lots of love to everyone during these interesting times, especially this middle point between the eclipses. And if you enjoyed this podcast, if you like listening to us, please share the love. Go on to iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and review. Make sure that you subscribe to get future episodes, which are released every single Sunday at midnight. And also sign up to be a patron if you haven't already. We have contributions as low as $1 up to $20 if you really like us. So yeah, thank you guys for the support. It's always really great to hear how much you enjoy listening to us, and we really appreciate the feedback.
Yes, absolutely. We do. And we're so glad to be here for you because, this is an incredible journey for both of us as well. And, it gets more and more exciting every week. So, yes, I'm sending you lots of, light and love as well. And thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, may the stars be with you.
Namaste.